can you tell me a little bit about Jan Hammer, because you played a lot with Jan, didn't you? Did you play with him in the Tommy Bolin band? Is that right?
No. No, quite frankly, Jan scared me because we were in rehearsal with Mahavishnu Orchestra and at SAR in New York. And I'm a fan of Jan Hammer, although I never really met him. I'd seen him play a few times with Mahavishnu Orchestra and how genius he is. And when he walked in the rehearsal room, it's for me, it was a life defining moment. Like, whoever I am, whatever I got, I better bring it, because there's this damn Jan Hammer looking at you. And Vishnu and I were just doing something, and we just had a good time playing. And it wasn't long after that, Jan asked if he came on a few of the shows we played just to kind of jam. And to actually hear him jam was like incredible. He'd be in Boston or wherever it was on the East Coast, he'd come and jam. But I never really still hung out with him or anything like that. On the Tommy Bolin album, Marching Powder, that's my first time playing live with him.
Yeah.
And to actually watch him in a room, because that was everyone in the room playing. And I was just taken by him again. His timing is just flawless. And then, of course, you mentioned Wired. Those pieces, Lead Boots, Come Dancing, Play With Me, Sophie, he's overdubbing. He was not there. He overdubs to the T every little thing that I might play, or someone plays so perfectly. You think we're all in the same room, but it's not.
I can't believe that, because you and him on those tracks, there's a magic going on between the way you play, the way you feel time, and the way Jan Hammer feels time. That did so much. I can't believe that he's overdubbing that.
Yeah. And I didn't hear it till the record came out. It was mixed at his place, coming out. I buy a copy and I hear what he's playing. Like, damn, this guy's phenomenal.
I think he's underrated. I think that as a keyboardist, he's one of the greatest. And he's jazz keyboard playing, Hammond organ, and then the Moog, which he invented. But he's one of my favorite drummers. Yeah. I can hear Tony Williams so much. You say no one can play like Tony. Jan he's not far from Tony. You can hear it. It's incredible playing, and then his production as well. The way he mixes stuff, absolutely incredible.
He mixed that Lead Boot album, the Wired album.
Yeah,
George Martin, those guys mixed it, but guess what? It wasn't until Jeff went over to Jan's place and fell in love with the sound that came out of Jan's studio that Jan mixed it.
Well, it was offensive, quite frankly. To wait for that moment where the big, public television series is going to be the history of jazz and not have the entire history of jazz and be exclusionary of things. I just thought that was offensive because I knew better.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You didn't sell me that Satchmo was the only thing that happened in the last 100 years or so. So, I was already, way past that curve onto another curve, waiting for someone to deliver a true history of jazz and leaves out anything that has electric instruments and, has any sort of non-harmonic content. So that was offensive. And yes, it was a response. The Coltrane project was with Nels was a response. Even the musical box for me was a response because, playing the music of your life besides my original music, repertoire is a statement. You play the music you love. You play the music that you feel you can contribute to. And I always felt Mahavishnu was underserved. I felt that early Genesis was underserved. I felt that Coltrane later works were underserved. I felt that Monk was underserved. So, Thelonious Monk, I had a band called Evidence with Mark Rebo on guitar. And we were exploring Dolphy and Monk tunes. So the tunes that weren't getting played were the ones that I thought, well, we should play them. Somebody should play them. Why not us? And then I realized in order to have a Mahavishnu group, you couldn't just have a pickup group. You had to have an ensemble that really specialized in that stuff. You had to have the right keyboardist. You had to have the right violinist. You had to have the right guitarist. And to be able to play that music and do it justice. I never claimed that we were doing it better. we were doing it kind of differently, and we were trying to do it our own way. And so that I felt was the spirit of all jazz. I know Jan Hammer wouldn't agree with me that Mahavishnu is a form of jazz, but for me, it is. And the modalism, even the fact that they were sticking to, a single mode for a composition, that harkened back to Coltrane. And of course, John would admit that openly. So we always, we were taught by the best that you look backward while you're looking forward. And that's sort of been my mantra. 1 foot in the present, 1 foot in the future, and your third foot, or reaching back with your arm into the past, right? And what did we learn, and what can we do, and how do we celebrate it, and how do we make it fun and make it relevant 50 years later? That was the question of all of this stuff. Is when you try to rewrite history or exclude vast movements or revolutionary movements from history, that's politically very, shaky ground. It's sociologically shaky ground when you're leaving out who the people were that branched off and made a significant. I mean, there's a big run from the early 60s into the 70s of that music, freer kinds of music existing in classical, jazz, and rock. How can you deny it? So yes, it was a statement. To answer your question.
I'm talking to you because I found Alan Holdsworth fascinating for so many years. I do think he's the greatest musician of the last 50 years. I think if he did never taken a solo and only played
the chords
guitar, I still think he would be one of the greatest guitarists in the world. I think what he did in terms of guitar design, what he did in terms of tone, what he did in terms of chords, composition,
and
it's that all that's as incredible as the
he's the world's most incredible self-taught musician.
Yeah.
And that's why I love musicians that are unique in some sort of way, because they follow their own path, kind of like what I'm doing, although I'm not putting myself there like Alex. Like, I don't know any better. I'm just doing it this way, but it's more of an educational thing than playing on the instrument. But like, why does Alan play chords like that? Well, because his dad was a piano player and just, showed him these chords and he just had to work it. How did he play solos like that? Well, he's like, well, I don't know what anyone else does, so I'm just going to map out all the notes that I can and find out all the scales, and I'll pick the ones that work and I'll just play, you know what I mean? And well, I don't really want to play a guitar. I want to play a saxophone. How can I get my guitar to sound like like the guitar? And all these are like rhythm. Like we were saying, we were talking about rhythm before. I want to say, like, he thinks of everything in one. So he's not thinking of like 7/8 to 3/4, whatever. It's just everything is just how long it needs to be. And I think his rhythm was very good. He could play in time, but he just thought about it in a simpler kind of approach. And that's where you really learn the most from these kind of people, because everything about what he did, the way he wrote the tunes, the way he played, was so himself. He wasn't trying to copy anybody, and that's very rare that happens. So that's why, like, for me, I know the traditional way, and I know his weird way. How can I bridge that gap to explain it sort of to other people and to say, like, well, these approaches are so unique. Like with the chordal stuff, the biggest lesson I got from Alan that I love is, who cares? Like, who says I can't play the chord like this, or I can't play this scale this way, or whatever it may be. And it happened like that with chords. The chord names come from tertiary harmony. Every third note, major 7, because you have a major third and a major 7 interval, and A minor 7 flat 5, and there's all those names. I was just talking about this to a student. The weird name that we give the chord helps you tell what notes are in it. But if I go to C major and I just play 5 random notes and I go, what's the name of that chord? Because we're so used to this traditional system, we're almost locked in. Say, well, it's got the major 7 is the root note, and then we have and it becomes more complicated than where I was just going, it's just part of C major. You know what I mean? And it's so much more of a simpler, direct approach that's more appealing to me than the more traditional way. But it's that kind of thinking that makes him so unique, because literally everything about his playing was, I don't know what anyone else is doing. This is just what I want to do. And it just so happens to be that it's different from what what everyone else does. I just did not know any better, and that to me is exciting.
In jazz improvisation, everything's built from the chord, isn't it? So it's a chord fundamentally, and so you have the chord at the base, and then you go, well, that chord, you could play this scale over that chord. With Humphrey, I always felt like the scale was coming first, and the scale he saw as not having a root as well in the same. So it was as long as the guitar was long. So he didn't have that rooted thing. So he didn't really think modally either, which is the other way to improvise. He thought it's a pattern, and I can just pick colors out of that pattern.
Yes.
And I think that's his great.
Yes, but it's tough because since I know traditional music, that approach works for Alan's music very well, but it doesn't work for formal harmony because there are avoid notes. There are notes that have, in Alan's music, and I talk about this again in the video, I feel that every note has the same weight to it instead of it in a more traditional way where there's more of a palette of consonants. You got your chord tones, your color tones, your color tones that are not in a key, your avoid notes and your avoid notes that aren't in a key. That's like the spectrum. And if you want to play interesting, you just, how do I make a line sound good? We'll play more of the good notes and, sprinkle in some of the bad ones. It's like not that hard of an approach. But that weight of every note has equal value does not work in traditional jazz. And that's what makes it hard to bridge that gap. So like if you're doing a 2-5-1 and this and what, you have to say, okay, well, F will work for D minor 7 and it works for G7, but then when you get to C major 7, that F isn't going to work. But with Alan's music, it's just, this is a scale that I want to play. This is just a random chord, random 4 notes that I'm playing. And in my video, I use like a C major with an add 11. So the F, the avoid note, is already in there. So of course now every note has equal value, you know what I mean? And most of the chords that he plays already, even if it's a consonant chord, like a major 7, there already is some tension in there because there's some flat 9 if you do a third inversion major 7 where now you have a B as your root and you have a C on top, you have a flat 9 interval. It's like the chord already has tension that like you almost won't even hear the F in there because it almost doesn't sound like a major 7 anymore.
Sort of discovered him when I went to music school. So right after high school, I went to a music school in Los Angeles called Musicians Institute. So I was 18, was not very familiar with jazz at all. I grew up on, progressive music, rock music, pop music. But obviously I was so into guitar and virtuosos. He came to school and played. And I remember, it's funny because the first time he played at our school, it kind of went over my head. I really didn't understand it. I knew it was awesome and cool, but I couldn't make sense out of it. And then, it encouraged me to kind of go deeper in his catalog. I found some records of his, started listening, started making sense to me. And again, I credit him for myself as being the bridge from rock to jazz because he does it both so amazingly. Like he puts it together so well. So as you, noted earlier, I grew up a rocker. He was my bridge into the jazz world because he had both. And then, once I discovered his music, I just fell in love with his writing as well as his playing, which is always just so fluid and virtuosic and love it,
Yeah, so before we get onto the whole fusion thing, I think this would be a really interesting to talk about is actually jazz fusion and why do that, not straight jazz, and why not rock, but I always find this really interesting. What were the rock bands? What were you listening to before, you got into fusion and jazz, and what was the sort of route through those bands? Because there's often key rock players that get you there, aren't there?
Yeah, well, for sure. I grew up a huge Rush fan. Now, I'm not going to say I was a really big progressive rock fan necessarily, although I definitely dipped my toe in there, but I was a huge Rush fan. And in terms of guitar players, again, I was into virtuosity even then. Joe Satriani, Stevie Ray Vaughan, like really heavy blues. And this is the late 80s. So the Steve Vai, Joe Satriani thing was real big back then. So again, coming from the rock virtuosity and the progressive aspect of it, I think I just needed somebody to sort of bring me into the jazz world, because ultimately if you're continuing to search further, you're you're going to go beyond the rock world. It's going to lead you to either jazz or classical.
The kind of the gateway to the music of Chick Corea was earlier on. I was kind of like maybe in my last year of high school, and started to hear little things about this guy named Chick Corea, who had been around for a while a long time at that point. But I was hearing it at the end of high school and into college, and particularly that summer between high school and college. I just was like a sponge, just immersed myself in all things Chick Corea, and of course other, Herbie Hancock and Joe Zawinul and John McLaughlin and all those guys, and Keith Jarrett and Jan Hammer and George Duke, and the list went on and on. But Chick, for some reason, resonated with me differently, and he just opened it's like he had the key to something for me. I was able to discover in myself something I didn't know I had, and he sort of was lighting the way for me. I wanted to, let him know that. And when I was in my, I think it was my junior year of college, and I was still doing the radio show, I got to meet him for the first time. And we sat in the Carnegie Deli in New York at midnight over corned beef sandwiches and pastrami, talking. And I was with one of my best friends in the world, a gentleman named Bill Sod, and the two of us were interviewing him. And he was there with his wife, Gail, and manager at the time, Ron Moss. And the five of us were just eating, breaking bread, laughing, talking, and I just had the tape recorder running. It was more of a conversation or a documentary of the event than an interview. I was really young. I was like 20, 21 years old and nervous, but he made sure to put me at ease. He had children my age, and he was a dad, so he knew I was nervous, and he picked up on it right away. But he was able to just say, hey, just relax. We're just hanging out, and sure enough, I just sort of settled in, and we just had a great conversation. And that was the beginning of what became a friendship. Whenever I was on the road, he was on the road, I should say, and anywhere in proximity to where I lived, I'd go see him. And through his management, I was able to get access to kind of take a walk backstage and say hello, and we'd catch up, and it was special. And I'll say the last thing, maybe probably the most important thing, was I had written the tune Chicklets, and it was still in its, I hadn't recorded it yet, other than a solo piano version, but I hadn't recorded the new sort of expanded version. And I sent it to him. I sat in front of my piano with just taping it with my iPhone, and it was his birthday. And this would wound up being his last birthday. And I sent it to him on his birthday. And he wrote back in 10 minutes. And he said, and I have, in fact, I can call it up on my computer as we speak. He said, Tom, that was the sweetest. Beautiful, man. Lovely emotional rendition. I feel honored. It brought tears to my eyes. Muchas gracias, amigo. Chick. So when I got that, it made my year. And a year later, we lost him. But that was it. And I remember when I found out, one of my best friends told me, he said, and a bandmate of mine, Andrew Morrell, said to me, he said, I got some news. I hope it's not true, but you might want to check out Chick Corea's website. And when I went on, I saw the news, and of course I just, like a lot of people, just felt really bad. And I couldn't hold back the tears. I mean, it was a massive loss, just from what he did for me as a musician. He made me want to continue to be a musician. I mean, and I really put it on him. He was the one.
was pretty familiar with the material. But yeah, that Whiplash is on that record, and of course the ensuing movie featuring that song. Um, I had a hard time watching that movie, by the way.
Well, I mean, this is going to be the great moment of this video, I think, is that, you know, the original Whiplash drummer, here you are, Ralph, and I don't think you've got credit for that, you know, that when they made that film and they wanted a hard drum track, they went for Mr. Ralph Humphrey and his performance on that tune. So, you know, what do you think of the film?
Well, I can't agree with the film regarding, you know, the leader, his treatment of the band and especially the drummer. I mean, that's just not how you do things. So I was troubled with that. Um, and you know, Hank Levy, the composer of that film. And are you still there?
Yeah, I'm just having a little bit of problems now.
Okay, good. Yeah, because, you know,
You can still hear me, can't you?
okay, Hank Levy is the composer of that tune, and Hank wrote a lot for Don. And Hank had a great band in Baltimore at Towson State College, and Don found in Hank a sort of enjoyment of how he was writing, you know, and I think it helped Don to bridge the gap between Don's sort of crazy compositions and Hank's more in the groove, in the pocket kind of thing. So Whiplash was kind of a pocket tune, you know, in seven, and the fact that they ended up using the song in the film Whiplash, I thought was kind of interesting. But you know, nobody ever contacted me to talk about my performance of the original Whiplash, or even asked me to play on that film. They did it completely separate from, you know, from me and my knowledge of it. So when it came out, I was sort of I chuckled.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
When I watched it, I thought as a piece of entertainment, I was entertained by it. I was drawn into the characters. As a description of how music's made, it just lacks the love. I mean, for me, great music is an expression of love. I mean, I'm played for 40 years. Took me a while to realize it, you know. But you're with the musicians because you love them, and that's how you get performances out of people. I mean, people can be harsh. I'm sure Frank Zappa was harsh with you, but it's a different type of harshness, isn't it? It's
Well,
not.
it was. Yeah. I mean, I could handle Frank because I respected him so much for his compositions and what he wanted. He wanted perfection, and so he got a band together that gave him near perfection, pretty much most of the time, and I was okay with that, you know. And you know, five days a week rehearsals for 3 or 4 weeks before going on the road. That was the routine, and so you know, by the time 4 weeks was up, we were ready to go, and that's why the band came off so well, because it was so darn tight, playing this really difficult music.
Things like, I don't know, do you know a track called RES? You know,
Yeah. I know that's one of my favorite tracks.
Yeah, that's all real playing. On Sing to God, it was all drum machine or programmed drums. Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this like shows how much I know.
and also, I mean, for the majority of the album, it was only me and Tim that played on it. You know, Jim Smith played on about 4 tracks, I think. Bob did a load of backing vocals. I mean, we all did the backing vocals, but he wrote some words as well. Like, I think he wrote about 90% of the lyrics to a track called Dirty Boy, I think I heard you mentioned before.
Yeah, well, I suppose one of the greatest songs ever written. I mean, it made my list of 10 greatest songs of all time. There's something just massively moving about it. There's just something I can't put my finger on. I think this is why I wanted to chat to you. And I really wanted to get into the process of how you made Sing to God, because it's different to the other albums, because you were really involved, weren't you? You weren't just playing on it. You were involved in the creation of it. So
yeah, I mean, previously before me, there'd been Bill Drake, and he'd brought a fair few ideas in, you know, and co-wrote a lot of the songs with Tim, you know, and or some of them, you know, and but it was still kind of Tim, as far as I know, Tim sort of doing all the arrangements and stuff, you know, and back then he would manuscript it for, I think sometimes for Bill and sometimes for Sarah, the sax player. But by the time it got to us, there was, I mean, I don't read music, so there was none of that going on. And but no, what he would do, I mean, basically what happened was we set up the studio. We kind of moved it because he had it all in a shed at the end of his mum's garden in Chessington, and that's where we did our initial recordings. Because the first recording we did, which was, I don't really count as being the Sing to God session, but it was an EP which had the tracks Belly Eye, Horse's Tail, and No Gold on, and they were all recorded in that shed sort of thing, and that in early January '95, and I think it was June '95 that we just upped all the gear, took it over to Jim Smith's bass player's house in the country, and I mean we set it all up there, and that to me is where Sing to God starts being made, sort of thing, and that's where the majority of the stuff got made. And the way it worked was Tim had programmed drum machine and an organ playing the chords and a vocal melody like that, and that's all he had. And he said to me, right, come up with riffs like that. So I sat there and came up. What I'd do is I'd get a little cassette of it. I'd go into the back garden, sit in the sun with a Walkman on, and I'd go through and come up with guitar riffs and bass riffs for a lot of the songs, you know, and things like Fiery Gun Hand, you know, and stuff like that, Dog Like Sparky and things. And he basically gave me free rein to do what I wanted, really. I was really surprised because I knew how in control of the whole thing he'd been up until then, you know. So, so I would go in and stick down some bass, stick down some guitar. And then there were songs that I wrote that I think, one of them, Man Who, I think I just strummed on the guitar to him and sung it to him. I didn't even demo that one. It's the only one I never demoed. And he was like, yeah, all right, let's start. And we went in and just recorded all of that stuff from scratch, sort of thing. But it was there was a lot of free rein given to sort of just do what I wanted to do, sort of thing. But it was a great process, and it was really it was a real happy time. You know, we were all having a laugh doing it. And then we'd have parties at the weekend where we'd just invite all our mates over and do loads of drugs.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, I mean, we've kind of touched on the drum thing. I mean, you know, the drum, I think the biggest taboo that real drummers hate is Beat Detective, which is a Pro Tools sort of program, but plugin. But also, I think other programs, you know, like Cubase, and I think they've all got their own versions of something that quantizes normal audio. And Beat Detective is, I've only ever used it a couple of times, and every time I've used it, it just turns the drummer into a drum machine. Really do. And it takes all the life and all the dynamic out. So, and I know a lot of people use that a lot because, you know, everyone's so used to now drums sounding so tight and so rhythmic, you know, like so mechanical.
Yeah.
That, I mean, some bands even use drum machines instead of real drummers, and then try to make out that they're actually a drummer playing, but it's a machine, you know. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get into it. But you and me both know who does things like that.
A band that I was connected with.
Oh, but you connect? I've been connected with so many bands, haven't you? I mean, you know, I don't want to get frosty about it. All right, so just leave it there. I'll get into trouble now. Anyway, but yeah. So with drums, that's one of the things they do. They overcompress drums a lot in a lot of music at the moment, not just prog, but a lot of music. And I think that, like, you know, if you hark back to some of the greatest albums that you like, you know, like the Floyd albums, all the bands from the 70s, no matter what band you pick, the drums were like, they were just amazing sounding drums, and probably they had the least treatment on them at that point, you know, because drums, I think from the 70s into the 80s, I think they didn't really look that much at drums and think, we need to work on these and make them sound massive and all that, you know, like the, you know, your John Bonham kit and all that, with like 3 microphones on it. That was an exception because that was a great sound, but it was something that wasn't important. And now it's gone the other way around. It's processed to hell. And sometimes you do sit there thinking, is that a real drummer? And then if it's not a real drummer, you're thinking, is that the real drum kit? You know, so that happens.
Overarching point in your video was that the intellectualization and the academic nature of nowadays jazz education world is what homogenizes musicians across the board. And this is something I definitely feel like I've experienced in my college years. To give you a quick anecdote, I was at the time, so I'm a rock kid, yeah, by nature. I'm a rock guitar player, and I was suddenly finding myself in all these ensembles, jazz ensembles. And at the time, I was really getting into Mike Stern because I feel like he was, for me, a good gateway drug into the world of jazz, because he has this huge rock influence. So I was hauling around my chorus pedal into any of the rehearsals of the jazz bands. And again, the teachers would tell me to turn it off. You know, there was no room for experimentation, even though this was not like a big band ensemble with written charts or anything. This was, here's jazz standard, let's play it, let's see what happens. But the let's see what happens is very prescriptive, very narrow in its nature, right? We don't really see what happens because we expect this to be a very specific result, which is kind of ironic if you think of the nature of what jazz music is all about.
Well, it was 2012. We did 30 shows?
30.
Something like that. Yeah. Something like that. We were gone for 30 days. I think we didn't play every day. I don't know if you guys, if you probably know Moon June Records. And,
yes, yes,
Leonardo Pavkovic. So Leonardo used to be Alan's manager, and we put out 2 or 3 of our albums with Leonardo back in the early 2010s. And he hooked it up. We opened for Scott's band on a shorter tour too with Jeff Berlin and Mike Clark. So we had to, they were all riding in our van. It was Virgil and Jimmy Haslip, Virgil Donati, and we've just the basic premise was that we were gonna be opening up every night, but we're their bitches, so we have to carry all their shit and help them set up because they're old. And we picked them up in Philly, and Leonardo was like, it's like, you don't know Alan, it's nice guy, nicest guy, but just don't take him to the bar. They're like, all right, we can do that. So we pick him up at the airport. We go to get his luggage. It's like, hey guys, can we go to the bar? We're like, yep. That was the first night. So, I mean, we knew it was a drinking problem pretty within a few minutes, because he was like, around the tequila? We're like, yes, Alan Holdsworth. We're drinking tequila. It's around the tequila? We're like, yeah. It's around tequila? Like, oh yeah. It's around tequila for everybody? We're like, oh shit. And then it just kept going. It was this is 10 minutes in the bar. And and then it got a little dark. He was like, please don't make me drive. And we're like, we're driving. It's okay. We're all fucked up, but we'll drive. So that was the first night. And I mean, the tour was great. He's he was just a very fun guy that, at that point was the end of his life already. We were also partying a lot back then, which, looked a little bit better on us at 26 than it did on him at 65 at the time, or 66, I think he was. but you know, he was just way open, very cool. We were listening to cool stuff, and like we kept like playing him the shit that we were listening to, and we met, like there were these points where we would like meet on like listening to music. Like he didn't want to listen to Jeff Beck and stuff, but he wanted to like we were listening to Sinatra a lot. That was cool, you know. And we listened to some Django stuff that we hipped him to Jimmy Rosenberg. I don't think he was aware. And yeah, it's like, you know, he just had a normal taste in music.
And I've got to go back to the academic angle you mentioned, because it sounds like you're addressing a lot of what comes out of directly from the academia and then trickles down all the friends of these musicians who come out of these master's programs, whether it's the New School or Juilliard or North Texas. I mean, there's a plethora of heavy, intense, high-level music education here, at least in the US. I'm sure England has its versions, but what happens is those people come out armed with all of this jazz theory and fact, quote unquote, and attitude. And because they have master's degrees and because they play their asses off, everyone around them goes, oh, well, whatever they say must be true about it. And they start to adopt this attitude, which, as you said, it's this ridiculous, aggressive, precious. You know, it really comes from a lot of insecurities. And so how can you teach jazz? How can you grade jazz at the university level? How can you tell someone they're not playing with enough soul, or that their solo wasn't true to what they were, the storytelling there? You can't. So you make up all these rules, what you said earlier, the flat fives, the sevens, the changes, the chords. This is the correct way to play this 2-5-1. That's the only way these schools can justify having advanced degrees and PhD programs, is to have some codified rules that are either right, you pass, or wrong, you fail. And so that really screws over the whole feeling part of jazz. What it does is it ensures that this intense the technique side of jazz, and the drummers have this problem too. You know, I mean, you can teach some pretty technical stuff that at the end of the day would totally screw over a Count Basie record, which is just quarter notes. You know, some of those Frank Sinatra records and with the Count Basie band, I mean, the whole band was swinging. It gets deep, but so it's important when people start getting uppity about jazz is first to ask them to identify what kind of music are you referring to, because jazz is at least 130 years old now. It's been played with straight eighth notes. It's been played with triplets. It's been played with rhythm in between. It's been played in a blues idiom with one chord change. It's been played with 20 chord changes. You know, what is it?
So Bonham is the beginning. Then that led to like Terry Bozzio, huge Terry Bozzio fan. All those Missing Persons records, like I said, playing in your room.
Yeah, well, I've seen you on YouTube with Thomas and Terry. Oh,
yeah. That was fun.
Because I'm a huge Terry Bozzio fan. I mean, there was one point where I had to stop because I had the two Chinas and I just sounded exactly like him.
Well, I showed Rainon, Terry's son, I humorously sent him a picture and I said, you want to see how crazy I was about your dad growing up? I sent him two pictures, and one was me, because the band that I was in as a kid would eventually have Josh Freese as a second drummer. He played Simmons. And so my kit was an acoustic kit, this big white Tama kit with the two Chinas up high and the cymbals on the side and bells and things like that. And then Josh's kit would be the Simmons kit with a Radio King snare drum, a vintage, you know, like 20s, 30s Radio King snare drum, and China's up high and everything. And I sent that to him, and he showed Terry, and Terry's like, oh my God, this is hilarious.
And Greg Biz did it with Dave Lee Roth. As soon as he joined that band, he went to, I mean, nobody mentions this, but that two Chinas thing, that's Terry. There's so much.
And all those metal guys back then in the 80s all had the chinas up like that, not necessarily like the way he did it, but they had him up to one side because it looks cool. But yeah, Terry, and then Stuart Copeland, Phil Collins, Omar Hakim, Manu Katché, Gad, and Jeff Porcaro, obviously, from it just depends on which direction I was looking at any given time. The meters thing, I started hearing subconsciously some of that stuff, and the thing that attracted me to it was that New Orleans swagger, that it doesn't really swing and it's not straight.
Yeah, I love that.
The first time I heard that was actually Bonham. There's a song called Black Country Woman, and that song just destroyed me. Oh man, because I would play the Physical Graffiti record in loop, the whole thing. I'd play it top to bottom and then just cycle it around, play it again. And whenever that song would come up, it would just kill me. I just loved that. So it made me wonder, like, what is that? Where did he get that from? And so I went, searching for that, the origins of that. So that's all the meters and all the Creole Cajun stuff of these, Dr. John and yeah, I mean, it's not even about playing well, it's about playing right.
Luckily for us, the last producer we had, Jay Rustin, is really, really good. He is a bit more old school. So when I picked him up from the airport, I was the one that picked him up from the airport. We drove all the way up to Lincolnshire to Chapel. Fantastic recording studio, Chapel, right? My drums are set up in the old converted chapel, and the sound is just, it's to die for, as it would be. And I'm up with him, and I said, look, I've got the skins of my choice. I said, however, I've got the tape, I've got the moon gel, I've got bit of foam, I've got some towels, I've got 3 different rides. I said I've got 3 different chinas, 3 different hi-hats, I've got about 8 different kinds of crashes, right? He said, have you finished? I said, yeah. He said, I'm not interested in any of that. And it was fantastic. He said, I can't tell anything until I get in the room and you play how you play, and then that will determine what goes on. I thought, because before this, I've had producers telling me, no, I want this, I want this, I want that, without even hearing anything. And that tells me that you've already got this drum sound here. Well, what is that all about? Who are you to tell me my drum sound? It's disgusting. What tends to happen on the old school then, let's not go to Jay because he's a bit different, he's cool. But you go in there, front head off the bass drum. What? We need the front of off the bass drum. What, without air?
True.
Yeah. Okay, right, so the air can't respond off the skin, right, to give that nice, all the low frequencies are gone straight away. I said, and the length of quarter note in a rock band, I'm talking about length, not talking about pop or anything like that, where you might need it, a little bit more muted, a little bit more dampening. In a rock setting, you want the front head off, and then you want a pillow put in there. So it's now turned into a cardboard box. And then you put a towel or you put this thing on it to make it a tunnel. So you've taken off the nice bit of air and bottom end, and you put a tunnel on to try and get it back because you didn't want the resonant head on. How the hell does that work? And then the technicality, wizardry of what they read on page 57 comes out to you. I'm not interested in that, mate. I'm interested in the sound. That's all I'm interested in. I produce a sound, you capture the sound, record it, and Bob's your uncle, right? So not only does that get done, you can't play big cymbals in the studio. No, what are you talking about? Oh, no. See, the sound, when it goes down, they give it all the mics in it. You have to play smaller cymbals. Can't hit them as hard. No, hang on a minute. So you've gone to, obviously, a school that knows shit about drums, right? I spent a lifetime, I went to bed with a 16-inch crash cymbal, mate, and you're turning around and telling me, right, how I should be playing. You are supposed to be recording me as a drummer, irrelevant of how I sound in a way. Well, with a session is different, right? But as a member of URIAH HEEP or whatever it is. So you want me now to change the way my emotion plays if I get into a crash cymbal. I really want to I'm not allowed to do that because I might upset the microphone that's hovering over my 12-inch tom-tom. No, mate, sorry. Right? It's for you to deal with. That's why drums are such a beautiful instrument, like a piano. The harmonics that go between the whole kit, splashes, crashes, rides, tom-toms, bass drums, snare drum, they're there, they work with each other. If you're a great drummer, you tune up the drums, it works like a grand piano. You wouldn't go round the notes, oh, that top D there is just interfering with that F sharp. So we'll just put a little bit of dampening on there so it doesn't give it a little bit of an overdub. You don't do that. Leave the flaming instrument. Leave it, right? If the drummer can't play, can't tune, right, you have to look at it differently. But don't disrespect someone who's been playing ages. And you wouldn't have got, you see, John Bonham's drum sound is John Bonham's drum sound. Everyone raves about it. Yes, let him have. Billy Cobham had his drum sound. You know what I mean? That's the only way for me to have the identity and to also allow drums to breathe, instead of someone that thinks they know everything, telling you how to play, telling you how to muffle your drums. So I've got to play not like myself, so why am I here? And I've got to have a drum sound that doesn't sound like me. What am I doing here?
Like you start hearing comments of, like these extremes of folks saying, oh, went and saved jazz, and another was, no, went and ruined the music and blah, blah. And, there was one comment that I remembered particularly that I'll never forget, because it was like, that's interesting, where it was somebody, I think it was on, because I used to go on these, back in the early days of the internet, the AOL message boards, a long time ago. This is when it was first starting, and I'd go on there, and after a while I realized that there was people in there that liked music. So I'd go in there. I was in college, so I'd go in there and just talk trash, and But I remember there was this discussion about the 1970s, which was interesting. I think that the 1970s is one of those decades that need to be looked holistically and not like partially, but in terms of everything that was going on. And so there was a discussion about what was happening with it in music in the 80s, and then someone made this comment saying, it's like, man, the 70s guys, they had their eyes on the future, and everything was great until the Young Lions came and messed it up. And I was like, like, that's interesting. I'll have to. And I didn't even agree or disagree. It was just, wow, all right, I'll have to give that one some thought. That's an interesting comment, But then, it was somewhere when I was in maybe a year or so after that, I was listening to the Mahavishnu Orchestra's record, Birds of Fire, which is an incredible record. And for some reason, in the middle of that record, I said, oh, now I see why they hated women. Okay, all right. Oh, I got you.
Then I cannot believe this. That's my favourite band, the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I discovered your brother Winton at the same time as I discovered the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And here in the UK, this is the thing that's really strange with Wynton Marsalis. And I know why it happened. It's because he was playing classical music as well as jazz.
Oh, yeah.
I find that insulting to jazz. It was like the mainstream went, oh, my God, this guy is playing jazz, but he can actually play classical music as well. And I felt like I'd been brought up on jazz by my dad. And I was like, what? Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Oscar Peterson?
No,
there's no classical musician can play like that. I'd been brought up with that, and I felt like he had this mass acceptance because of the classical thing as well. As all this meant he was a proper musician.
You know what? There's some truth with that. And the funny thing is that it works in reverse where you'll have some saying, well, you know, he doesn't have the feel of the old guys, and which he actually didn't, but
he does now. He's studied that.
If he knew that,
yeah.
But I mean, but then again, it depends on your intent. Like, if your intent is to make the music better, yeah, then absolutely. But I think there was that thing of, well, you know, this is like in sort of the negative connotation of, yeah, well, this isn't like the feel of the real, but in a negative way. So it can go in reverse. But no, that is true. In fact, you know, that's something that has. It reminds me of a story that my late father, you know, who we all miss a lot, he told me something like that about the music of Ornette Coleman. Now, he was very lucky, and I don't know how many of these stories out there, but he was able to hear Ornette from like early, like before he got out there. Like he remembers because he was living in New Orleans, and I think he drove out to California, like because he was also in the Marine Corps at that time, but he would actually hear Ornette Coleman play, and I think Ornette's first record wasn't even out yet, and he had stories of hearing Ornette Coleman and Ed Blackwell practicing together, just the two of them, and how unbelievable that was. And he remembered when, you know, there'd be jam sessions and Ornette's playing and dudes are in the back laughing and all this stuff, man, and people weren't sure of what to make of it. But I think what upset him the most was the person that actually validated Ornette was Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein said, oh man, Ornette Coleman's a genius, and then folks left him alone after that.
Well, I have a few things to say about that, like, and thanks, you know, and I think it really, I don't intentionally do it. Just to me, it's like, I just think music isn't only one thing. So
yeah,
like to touch to different things of what you said, it's like the chaos and order. Absolutely. I think that makes any great artwork, right? And I think you could even apply that to why virtuoso music doesn't sound that great. It's too much order, you know? It's like,
yeah. That's exactly
way too much order. It's like, it's like, I want to, like, you have to mess up for me to believe that, like, you're feeling it almost. And you can't mess up on purpose, because then that's more order. It's more aesthetic. Yeah. But, and yeah. And like the thing about like the art, I think songs are obviously like a great vehicle for an artist, and the song does have to be like good enough, but I don't know, it's like, I think it's 99% the artist. It's like an attitude in pop music. It's like, it's the story of the artist singing the song. And it's like the same way it's an actor in a movie. It's like, if you can have someone reading the same script and this movie is terrible or this movie is amazing, and it's like, does that script resonate with the story of the actor? So I really do think it's all about like, yeah, I don't think there is such a thing as just some like stone cold, this is a great song, this is not a great song. It's like, this is a great song for this artist, most importantly, in this moment in time where it's going to connect to people culturally. And there's a thing, I mentioned this when we talked before. Sorry, I'll let you talk just to finish this. It's just really inspiring. And I talked about like when we talked previously about how much I love the KLF. Yeah. Like Bill Drummond and Jimmy Cauty and stuff. And it's like, you know, in the manual, like Bill Drummond has an amazing point, which I fully ascribe to. This has always been my sentiment. It's like, if you took two people and gave them the exact same drum machine, like preset, whatever, Roland TR-808, and it played the exact same preset at the exact same BPM, one is better, because one person has more attitude who presses that start button. And it's like, I fully believe that's true. You could do a double blind experiment. And it's like, it's proven true of dance music, you know. It's like, sometimes
what you're saying is who's pressing the button.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's important.
Who's pressing
it's not
the
about
button.
Anything else. It's not about like how fast it is or whatever. It's like it's the story of the person. It's always been that way with all art, you know. And really, the art is just a manifestation of that person. So, you know, someone who is too technically driven, I think that the story it's telling me, at least, is like, this person isn't maybe vulnerable or in touch with themselves enough to take a risk. So why would I listen to them when I could listen to Blind Willie McTell or something, you know, do something that feels like, you know, it's like, sometimes it's like 15 bar blues in order for him to get the full statement out. But it's like, it's so perfect because it's so real. Like, that's what I like, you know, and that's the story of him. It's someone who's being real, you know.
People watching this video, Matthew is telling you the truth here, right? If you're an artist, right? If you're an artist and you're trying to get your tracks out and you're thinking to yourself, how can I there's all this competition out there. There's all these tracks on Spotify, millions of tracks. How can I beat the competition? Right. The trouble is 99% of them aren't doing what Matthew's saying. And if you step back and go, what's this about? And why should people want to be interested? From the story, because it's often the story that they miss, isn't it? You know, who am I? What am I about?
Story of yourself is what I'm trying to get it back
it is,
to.
yeah,
It's all about yourself. And like, and that's the thing. It's like it leaks into the art and people can pick up on it, you know? So if, like I said, I think a big thing I have an issue with is when people make art, I can tell it's like, I don't think this person is in touch with themselves enough to be vulnerable, you know? So that's like a starting point. I think
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a professional bassist, electric bass guitar player. I've been that my entire life. I've never had another job, and I was born in the East Village of New York City. I'm a real Manhattanite New Yorker through and through. I started playing the bass when I was around 12 years old. And by the time I was out of high school, I was playing professionally. And my first real break, my first international concert tour was in 1976 with John Cale. So that's where it all kind of started. And I just kept going from there. I've been on lots and lots of records. Most of my career has been spent with the singer-songwriter Suzanne Vega, who I started working with in 1985, and still do occasionally. So yeah, it's been quite a ride. And in the middle of all that, I've managed to do Broadway, and I've written a few books. I've been in some artist documentaries, and you know, it's just a big mix of things that kind of keep me going.
So that's Suzanne Vega. I mean, what an artist, one of my favorite artists, one of the best songwriters of the last 30, 40 years, in my opinion.
Yeah, she's when she's on her game, she's one of the best for sure. There's no doubt about it.
And what of her records have you played on, just to let the audience know some of the heavyweight things you've done?
Well, the biggest one was the one that was her biggest record, the one Solitude Standing with, you know, My Name is Luca and Tom's Diner, you know, so those were huge hits, and that was a multi-million seller. And I'm very happy to have been on that ride with her.